What you know, alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Wednesday, April 2nd. Hope you guys have had a good day so far. If you're not subscribed to YouTube and didn't get the short update from yesterday, we have a jury in Lori's trial. I have to say, I'm shocked. I really thought it would take this week, maybe into next, but we have a jury of 13 men and 3 women. 4 of those will be alternates that will be determined later. So, openings will be Monday, April 7th. I fly out on Saturday, so I'll be there bringing it to you live all week. I'll be live streaming on my channel every day, and also at lunch breaks, I'll be doing Q&As with Law and Crime Network just like the old days. So, I'm really excited. Can't wait to get out there and see justice for Charles Vallow. I never realized how hard it would be to try to condense Charles's story with everything that was going on from October of 2018 up until July 11th, 2019, the day of his murder. So, if you're new to the case, tomorrow I'm going to put some links in the description of some more of the backstory so that you can get a better grip on it. For those of you who know this case, this is just a refresher because it's amazing how much you forget over the course of several years while the focus has been there in Idaho. If you're familiar with the case, you may think, why didn't we talk about this? But y'all know I could probably work on this until the actual second coming of Christ and still not be done with how convoluted this whole story is. We're going to briefly touch on how Lori and Chad met, some of their communications regarding Charles, and everything really that's a main point leading up to the murder and after. So let's jump in. Alex Cox had a history of doing Lori's dirty work. Back in 2007, Alex was arrested for aggravated assault for tasing Lori's third husband, Joe Ryan, who is also the father of Tylee. They were involved in a very nasty custody battle, and it was so bad that when they were exchanging custody of Tylee, they would have to do it at a neutral location, and Alex was waiting for Joe and tased him. Alex was arrested and served 90 days in jail, although later on that record was expunged. But overall, until Chad came in the picture, it seems like Charles and Alex got along and there weren't any major issues with their relationship. Lori and Charles were married February 24th, 2006, and Tylee was young, maybe around 4 or 5 when they got married. Lori's older son, Colby, who is from her second marriage, has always said that he considered Charles to be his dad. It was the most stable life he had in childhood when Lori was married to Charles. In 2013, Lori and Charles began the adoption process for JJ, and he was officially adopted in July 2014. Little JJ was an in family adoption. He was actually Charles's great nephew. He is the grandson of Charles's sister, Kay Woodcock. At the end of 2014 and possibly the very beginning of 2015, Charles, Lori, Tylee, and JJ moved to Hawaii. Friends of Lori's from Hawaii say even back then she was somewhat obsessed with the end of times. And Lori is also reading Chad's books by this point. She would actually try to give them to friends to read. Fast forwarding just a bit, after Lori left Charles, he told police, and this was captured on body cam, that that was the time frame when he felt like her spiritual beliefs started changing. Lori had told a friend in Hawaii that Charles wasn't her spiritual equal. They moved back to the mainland in late 2016 or early 2017. And in early 2017, Lori and Alex start listening to podcasts that are not LDS based. And I think a lot of those were from Julie Rowe. I'm not sure if she is still doing her podcasts or not. I see the occasional TikTok every now and then. Colby told investigators that in early 2018, he noticed that Lori and Alex start to get a lot closer and Alex was coming around more. On April 3rd, 2018, Joe Ryan, Tylee's dad, is found deceased. His body was in a state of advanced decomposition, and he was estimated to have been dead for a few weeks. His cause of death was ruled heart disease. Now, much later, after Tylee and JJ were known to be missing, they did reopen that case. But in the end, it was still ruled natural causes and that case was closed. On September 22nd, 2018, Lori said she had a visit from either Jesus or Moroni. In late October 2018, Lori and Chad meet for the first time. They meet at one of these conferences where Chad was a speaker and he was also selling his books. They started a fast and furious, messed up, loaded, God complex relationship that ultimately ended in the deaths of 4 people and nearly 5 with Brandon Boudreaux. Lori's niece, who I call Melanice. Now, Lori has a niece. I call her Melanice because there are 2 Melanies in this story, and it's just easier for me to keep up that way. She starts spending more time with Lori. At this point, Melanice is married to Brandon Boudreaux, and they have 4 children. Also, sometime around here, Lori sets up a new bank account. On October 30th, 2018, Chad emails Lori a document about the Church of the Firstborn. And he tells her, here are the family history documents you requested. This is when Chad sends Lori the light dark scales that rated Lori's family. Now, how does this light dark scale work? Melanie Gibb testified that shortly after meeting Chad, Lori told her spirits who signed a contract with the Savior before coming to this planet were light spirits, and those who signed a contract with Satan were dark spirits. She did tell Melanie Gibb that she learned this from Chad. There's also a trust scale that went from 0 to 100 of how much you could trust somebody. Another element in all of this is something they call vibrations. Chad would use a pendulum to gauge this. So for vibrations, you're either beginning your translation or you're translated. As you get higher in your vibrations, you were able to portal. The document that rates Lori's family. The dark spirits were Lori's second husband, which is Colby's father, Colby's wife, Kelsey. Tylee was a 4.1 dark, which is high on their made up scale. One of Charles's sons was deemed dark, and Melanice's husband, Brandon. For me, I have always thought that these ratings were probably based on the way Lori talked to Chad about these very people that were deemed dark. It's interesting to me that Tylee was rated so high on the dark scale. And I think that Lori used Tylee being a typical teenager. And clearly, Tylee was somebody who did not hold back her words or feelings. And maybe Lori thought that her being a typical teenager was a sign that she was dark. Just blows my mind, y'all. Chad also tells Lori in a past life they were married and their names were James and Elena. Elena was the daughter of Judas, and 2 of their children in a past life were JJ and Melanice. If James and Elena sounds familiar, well, they're the ones that experienced that loin fire. On November 3rd, it's the first time Lori and Zulema discuss Charles being harmed. November 16th through the 17th, 2018, Chad speaks at an event in Mesa, Arizona, which is another Preparing a People event. This is the second time that he and Lori meet in person. He actually stayed at the home Lori shared with her husband, Charles. Also, during this trip, this is when Lori and Chad were fake sealed in the temple. They went together to an upper room of the temple, and Moroni gave Lori to Chad. The Savior was there, and they also believed they had been married in other probations. Lori had lived on 21 planets and Chad 31, and once he was the Holy Ghost. Chad has lived 5 times on this earth and Lori 4. Chad makes a portal in Lori's closet so they can visit. At this point, Lori thinks she doesn't have to go to the bathroom anymore. She doesn't have to eat and thinks that bullets will bounce off of her. Also around this time, Lori tells Zulema that her and Chad are very much in love. Mind you, both of their spouses still alive. December 28th, 2018, there are searches for Charles Vallow on Chad's Google account. Julie Rowe, the podcast host that Lori and Alex and everybody were listening to, said sometime in late December, Chad told her that Tammy Daybell, his wife, would die soon. Melanie Gibb testified at Lori's trial that Chad told Lori He knew years ago that Tammy would die young. January 2019, Lori and Charles moved to Gilbert, Arizona. Lori starts emailing Chad her dance videos. Yes, she was dancing in videos and sending them to Chad. I'd give anything to see them. Maybe when those FOIA docs come out, y'all. The problem was Lori did not delete the emails in the sent folder, so Charles found them. He starts to get suspicious that Lori's having an affair with Chad, and he would be right. January of 2019, Melanie Gibbs says Lori told her Charles and JJ would die in a car accident. Gibbs said she was present during a phone call with Lori and Chad when this was discussed. Lori told Melanie Gibbs that when Charles didn't die in the accident, that's when his spirit left his body and a dark spirit entered. Lori also said the reason he wasn't in a car accident is because Satan interfered with their plan. Lori also told her that both she and Chad envisioned their spouses would pass away so they could be together. She said her understanding was because Charles was a dark spirit and he needed to die. January 6, 2019, Lori Zulema, Melanie Gibb, and a group have their first meeting. I believe this may be a meeting that Christina Atwood was at. Christina is one of the witnesses Lori does not want to testify at her trial. January 22nd, 2019, Lori gets an email from Chad with the subject, Demon with a name, Ned Schneider. And Chad says Charles is a demon. There were several names given to this fake entity that was in Charles. Ned was the first name, Garrett was the second, and then the third and final was Iplos. Iplos was supposed to be a combination of evil spirits and very powerful. Melanie Gibb testified at Lori's trial in January that Lori said Chad informed her that Charles had been taken over by a demon, which turned him into a dark spirit. Originally, Charles was a light spirit on that family light dark chart Chad sent Lori. Gibb explained that every time a dark spirit was cast from Charles, Lori would say a new one would enter. The castings were done with everyone in a circle. Lori would be the one to assign roles during the casting. Lori asked Zulema to use fire as her powers, and then after the casting, Lori would do a sealing to make it final. Around January 23rd or 24th, Charles finds that light dark email that was sent from Chad to Lori. On January 28th, Lori transfers $10,000 out of Charles's business account, and she also transfers 2,000 Enterprise rental car points to herself. That same day, Chad searches for Ned Schneider, 1996 death, Louisiana. Ned Schneider, Louisiana. Ned Schneider, Louisiana, born 1951, died 1996. And he also searched for bodies possessed after original occupant dies. This is 6 months prior to Charles Vallow being murdered. On January 30th, Lori transfers $25,000 from Charles's business account, leaving Charles unable to make his payroll. Charles is in Texas and tells Lori he's coming home to Arizona that night. Investigators noted there's no indication of any trouble between them prior to this. At 4:14, Charles texts Lori, "I'll come home tomorrow. I'll get JJ as you asked and go to Louisiana. I don't want you to destroy me as you said." Lori tells Charles over the phone that she is a god and was assigned to carry out the work of the 144,000 at Christ's second coming. At 4:33, Charles calls the Gilbert PD from Texas saying Lori was acting strange and making threats. He said Lori told him he was Ed Schneider and she was going to destroy him. The Gilbert PD instructed Charles to follow up with Community Bridges when he got back from Texas. Community Bridges is where you would go to have a psychiatric evaluation. At 4:38, Charles texts Lori, "Please call me." And Lori responds, "It's too late for words. I'm done." Charles is ready to fly back home to Arizona, but he finds out his ticket has been canceled, so he has to spend $600 to buy a new one. Between 6 and 10 p.m., Charles is traveling from Dallas, Texas, back to Phoenix. When Charles goes to the parking garage to get his truck, it's not there, it's gone. So he has to rent a car to be able to leave the airport. At 8:12 p.m., Chad conducts a Google search, Ned Schneider, Louisiana obituary, 1997. As far as Charles's truck, according to Melanie Gibb, Alex drove Lori to the airport to get the truck. Gibb said she was with Lori when Lori took a box of Charles's clothings from the truck and then donated those to Goodwill. Lori had another box of Charles's clothes behind food storage in the house. Melanie Gibb asked Lori if she thought she was being a little extreme, but Lori told her it was God's will. At 11:38 p.m., the Gilbert PD received an emergency health petition for Lori that was completed by Charles. It was for an involuntary hold for a 72-hour observation at Community Bridges. In that, Charles said that Lori told him he's not Charles, and I don't know who you are or what you did with Charles, but I can murder you with my powers. She also referred to Charles as a dark spirit. Lori also sent messages to family members asking them to please not answer the phone if Charles calls you. We're in a big argument and he's looking for people to be on his side. January 31st, Charles's number is blocked on Melanice's husband's phone. That's Brandon Boudreaux. Brandon said the only person that had access to that phone was Melanice. Remember, Lori told everybody not to talk to Charles. Brandon would not find out that number had been blocked until after Charles is murdered. The next day, January 31st, 2019, at 7:25 a.m., Charles sends Lori a text. Your phone is active. I want no trouble. Just let me have my truck and clothes and I'll leave. And I have no money. We have to pay the rent tomorrow. What should I do? Will you let us use some of the money you took? Please do not go to work today. Your recommend has been suspended, meaning her temple recommend. Lori takes JJ to school and Charles shows up while Lori is inside getting JJ to class and he takes her purse. And the reason is he didn't want her to leave. He wanted her to be picked up to go to Community Bridges for that psychiatric evaluation. But Lori has a spare set on her and she leaves. Later that day, Charles is seen on body cam footage in the parking lot at the hotel Lori was staying at. He found the room key in her purse. He is pleading with these officers for help. And what's always been so sad to me is everything Charles said on these body cam videos would later be testified at both Lori and Chad's trial as the truth, but nobody listened. The cop on the body cam points out to Charles his priority should be to check on JJ since he said Lori was unstable. He notes Charles did not seem concerned about JJ's welfare, and I would like to point out here JJ was safe at school at this time. Charles said JJ should stay in school and then they could pick Lori up when she went to get him that afternoon. The cop told Charles they're not going to do a sting operation to catch Lori. The cop says in his report that Charles's demeanor was strange for someone in his circumstances, and he was more concerned about the legalities of the money Lori withdrew than her, quote, alleged incoherence, end quote. This same day, Melanie Gibb was driving through Lori's neighborhood and sees a man named Jason Mao. We just didn't get into how he fits in, but he's former law enforcement that had a podcast, and he was actually the one that introduced Lori and Melanie Gibb to each other. Jason advises Melanie Gibb that Lori should file a police report about Charles taking her purse. So we see Lori, Melanie Gibb, and Tylee on surveillance inside the Gilbert Police Department. Lori wanted documentation that Charles took her purse, but no charges filed. My 2 cents on the reason why she didn't want to press charges is maybe if they were to reconcile, it would not be a good thing that she had him charged, or more likely, if she wanted to make it look like she was reconciling, that wouldn't be hanging over her head. But again, that's just my 2 cents. While Lori, Tylee, and Gibb are talking to the officer there at the Gilbert PD, Lori totally works her magic. She tells investigators that Charles has cheated on her while he's been on business trips. You see Lori doing exactly what she does in these hearings that we've been seeing lately which is she raises her voice and gets very animated and excited when trying to express her point. And one thing that always stood out to me about that video is the way Tylee would very gently tap her mom's arm when she got like that, and Lori would immediately calm down. Investigators called Charles and tell him that he could be charged with theft if he did not give that purse back. Charles said he wanted to share the money that Lori took from the account. Charles asked if they were going to serve the commitment papers on Lori, and the investigator told Charles he did not know anything about that, but he could bring Lori's property and the petition to their office to get it verified by their sergeant, and Charles agreed to do that. The investigator said in his time with Lori, Lori was in a normal state of mind, but slightly upset she didn't have her property. She showed no signs of mental distress and was in a good mood. They verified the petition and they encouraged Lori to talk to the employees at Community Bridges, and they did offer her a ride. Lori was confused how Charles could make stuff up and get her involuntarily committed. The officer told her the petition did exist and encouraged her to go ahead and take care of it. And if she didn't, he would have to take her without her consent. Lori said she would go on her own, and Tylee promised she would make sure Lori did. The officer said after this conversation, he did not feel the need to take Lori to Community Bridges. At one point in the interview, the officer actually advises Lori on how to avoid being picked up for that involuntary hold. February 1st, Lori checks herself into Community Bridges and she is discharged within a few hours. She texts Charles and tells him that his truck is behind the Hyatt Hotel and his clothes were in boxes by the garage. February 4th and 5th, Lori gets 2 new phone numbers and shares that with Zulema. And on February 4th, Charles files for an order of protection against Lori. And because of that, they're only supposed to communicate through text message and only to discuss parenting and financial issues. She was also restricted from coming to their residence. It was a different one from where Charles was shot and killed at. And she was allowed one deputy to accompany her to get her belongings. We're going to end there. Tomorrow, we'll keep going with the build up to Charles's murder. For this episode, I really just wanted to give a roundabout backstory as best I could and just some of the things that were happening in this time frame to show Charles's frustrations. He was on body cam several times. Every single time, he really just wasn't taken seriously. And it's hard to watch, even now. Tomorrow, we'll get deeper into things between February and July when Charles is shot and killed. That is it for today. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.